What kind of people are we?
I am in radio contact.
What kind of people are we?
Attention crew, this is your Captain Caliban speaking. This is a supplemental episode of Enterprising Individuals, where we bring you news and tidbits from the world of Trek, also interviews with special guests, and a few little surprises along the way. As the summer wanes, it's time for the teachers and students of the world to return to the halls of learning for another school year of reading and writing and relativistic time dilation effects in vectored impulse flight, or whatever kids are studying these days. And for the next 2 weeks, I'll be headed to school myself, as I'm joined on the show by a pair of academics who are sharing insights from their particular fields and applying them to the world of Star Trek. The bell is ringing, and we don't want to be late for class, so let's get underway. Right before we get started, I wanted to take a second to congratulate CBS, as the Star Trek franchise has been selected to receive the 2018 Governor's Award from the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. The Governor's Award was created in 1978 to honor an individual, company, organization, or project for outstanding achievement in the arts and sciences or management of television. CBS will receive the award on behalf of Star Trek during the Creative Arts Emmy Awards ceremony on September 8th. In a statement, the chair of the Governor's Award Committee, Mark Spatney, said, quote, "Not only have all the Star Trek franchises promoted inclusiveness and acceptance of all people and inspired creative thought about space exploration in our future, but the technical innovations sparked by the franchise are incredibly significant to the evolution of television production and also to the communication and computer tools we use in our daily life." End quote. This is the first time the award has been presented to a fictional franchise, at least as far as I can tell, and if anything, it's overdue, and it's a nice feather in the cap for Star Trek for all it's accomplished in its 52 years of existence. If you want to check out the Creative Arts Emmy ceremony this year, you can catch it on September 15th at 7 p.m. on FXX. All right, class is in session. Come on, everybody, settle down. This week, our guest lecturer is Dr. David A. Banks. David is a writer, researcher, and teacher who holds a Ph.D. in science and technology studies, and he's taught classes on urban geography, digital design and history, and communication theory. He's also a former guest on this program. We discussed the Voyager episode, The Voyager Conspiracy, the last time he was on the show. And after talking with Dave and talking specifically about the nature of humanity's relationship with technology and digital services in the world of Trek, one question came into my mind that I just couldn't dismiss. Does Captain Picard have a Facebook account? You'll get the idea when you hear the interview. We ended up asking all kinds of questions about the world of Star Trek, a world that, to be honest, has prefigured or directly inspired many of the technological advancements that we enjoy in our modern world. But as a work of fiction made before the digital revolution, many of the social and political ramifications of our digital environment are suspiciously missing from the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th centuries seen on screen. Does Naomi Wildman play Fork Knife? Does 7 of 9 spend all night on GitHub? And most importantly, is Geordi a mod on r/Red Pill? I can't promise that we'll answer any of those questions in our talk, but we give it the old college try. Here's my talk with Dr. David Banks. The topic, or our topic today, is an esoteric one. And, frankly, it's a wide-ranging one. It's something I've been thinking about for a while now in regards to Star Trek. I guess the best way to sort of summarize it for like a pull quote would be, does Captain Picard have a Facebook account? Mm-hmm. And before anybody ats me or emails me, I know that the real answer is that social media didn't exist when the show was being written. But Trek has prefigured or even inspired so much of our technical development and culture. And yet for a show that's about finding new people and talking to them, they didn't see social media coming. And in fact, when you pin Trek down, its entire relationship to computing, social media, and information sciences is pretty shaky. Would you agree with that assertion?
Yeah, I would. In fact, I would. It's kind of hard to even say whether or not Star Trek prophesizes or predicts, or if it creates its own predictions, to be true. Like, it makes them true because it inspires people who then go on to make things, right? So like the Razr flip phone, like the people who made that, explicitly said like they wanted to make the communicator, and that's why that's why it flips. Like that was like part of it. And designers of ships, of military ships, have like talked to the stage and set designers of Star Trek about bridges. They've and even DARPA sets out challenges that say like make a tricorder.
Yeah, I think I remember that I reported on that last year. I think I can't remember what the project was called, but yeah, the idea was to create a medical device that could essentially do like a set like 100 different tasks diagnostically.
Yeah,
and yeah, that's so weird. Do you think that it's just Trek's position as kind of the leader, the preeminent sort of example of speculative fiction in popular culture that puts it in that role, or was there something about just because somebody would have come along and came up with an iPad eventually, right? If Trek didn't,
right.
But were they doing it at a certain time that was very influential, or is it just the fact that they're the only game in town?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the people that, I think like the age of the people that are like at the top of engineering and design fields are at the right age that TNG would have been influential to them as a kid, probably. Yeah. So, I think that definitely matters. I would like to hear, what like in the people that like, put together Siri or Alexa, like, are they constantly thinking about, are they constantly thinking about, hello computer, Earl Grey, hot, please. Right. Or is that something that's like imposed on that by the tech media that covers it and say, oh, you'll be, because when Alexa came out and all those voice assistants, that was like the first thing they referenced, right? It was like, It's just like Star Trek, right? So
right.
So even if it's not predictive or a force in the design process, although I think it is, like we map it onto it anyway because it's like that happens.
I'd hope that they would know about that sort of thing. But if they haven't, I'd love to show them that scene where Scotty talks into a one-button mouse in Star Trek 4. Just blow their minds with that.
Right. Yeah. Transparent aluminum, which is also a thing apparently now.
That is apparently a thing.
Yeah. I think it's called like I think it's like. No, I'm not going to pretend that I know material science.
It's an interesting point that you make about the generation, or the age or when the people sort of grew up that are making or at least developing these things. I've said this before on the show that all of Trek, in my opinion, up to and maybe including the new show Discovery, is still defined by this cultural mold that was cast in the 60s, like this kind of toe-dipping flirtation with counterculture, in the days of Camelot. If you took a phaser out of everybody's hand and replaced it with a six-shooter and gave him a cowboy hat, most Trek shows are basically Bonanza or like a cowboy show.
Absolutely.
And they have been for 50 years. And this isn't a show where we're going to try to critique the stranglehold that the baby boomers have on culture, but even when Trek tried to update its list of social issues that it was addressing, it's really late to the party on a lot of things. And to me, Trek staying abreast of the changing digital landscape is like your grandma trying to figure out how to tweet you. And once she does, it's all hysterical Newsweek articles.
Yeah. Oh wow, there's so many places to go there. Yeah, like one thing is that several sociologists have pointed out that once Westerns died down with the rise of cop procedurals. Okay. The idea being, the explanation being that we went from the sort of rural force of like sort of like white empirical or empiricist like man, like the
frontier spirit.
Like the frontier spirit, like the American like claiming land for America that belonged to other people, right? Like that that shifted to essentially maintaining empire, where you say that, oh, the big cities are uncontrollable, untamable, and so the frontier is internal and it's maintaining order.
Sure.
Right, and it does work the timing works out pretty well. Like, you know, a lot of westerns disappear, and you start getting like
the Naked City and things like that.
Yeah, and NYPD Blue and Law and Order and stuff like that. I mean, it's even called Law and Order, right? You know, it's like it's
right.
yeah. It's like it's in the name. Yeah. So and Trek falls into a weird category where it's like it still feels like a Western in that it's going out, right? It's not doing. I guess maybe Deep Space Nine comes the closest to kind of like cop procedural, because one, it has someone, you know, like nicknamed Constable, right? And it is dealing with a lot of like the Federation isn't as perfect as you think it is. But there's a contradiction in there, because they are on the frontier, right? They're supposed to be at the edge more than TNG was, and Voyager's somewhere else entirely.
And the core utopian values are never questioned. It's always people who have strayed from them or have perverted them. You know, even when Sisko's, like in Homefront and Paradise Lost, when Sisko's superiors are doing something, even they're doing something that they think is serving their ideals. And Sisko, you know, and the good guys are like, no, you've perverted those ideals. We all know what those ideals are. They're locked in a vault somewhere, and you've strayed from them somehow. But those ideals are never ever questioned.
Yeah. And to get back to your point about, you know, like, grandma tweeting Newsweek at you, you know, it's, you know, of course there is, like, you know, you can't expect too much from television writers to, you know, predict the rise of media. But, you know, the other thing is, like, you know, well, this is like my broadest sort of argument about social media, is that social media that we have now, right, isn't the kind of social media that would exist in some other society, which is just a way of saying, you know, that social media technology is a product of the society that it was designed in, right?
Sure.
So would a socialist utopia that can go anywhere, either through starships or transporters, have a use for Facebook, right? Like what is it good for if you can instantly transport your full body somewhere, right? So in some ways, transporters are social media, but you do see times where, like, you know, like when an admiral is giving an order, right? They basically Skype in, right, and talk to and talk to the captain or whatever. Or
now they just appear. On your ship. Yeah, and in
Discovery, they've decided that, like, that it needs to be a hologram, and they did that a little bit. Like Shinzon does that in Nemesis. He ports in as a hologram, and I think that makes sense cinematically. But then I always think about, like, well, like, what does the other person look like to them? Because sometimes they're sitting down. So, like, are they sitting down, like? Like, I don't know. I know, like, it doesn't make sense, but then when you think about it, it's like maybe that other person is sitting down too, and it
just makes them look like maybe they're naked. Yeah. They're just getting out of the shower. Or
right?
Something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it could you know, it's like a Bitmoji, right? Or like some sort of you know, character that you make for yourself. It just makes you look very presentable, no matter what you actually look like, right? You know, like it doesn't have to be representative of what you look like in that moment, right? It just needs to it just needs to synthesize your voice and look like you, and move your mouth in a way that isn't too uncanny, which is, you know, completely doable, right? Because they have holodecks, right? So it's like that's not hard to do. So, like, why bother, like, just making a facsimile? Just do that. Yeah.
I mean, if we can nail deep fakes, like, pretty well in the 21st century, it should be easy to make a fake recording to convince the Romulans to enter the war. But Sisko can't even get that right.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I was reading an IO9 article that was nominally about this topic, and the author remarked on the almost Victorian lives of the characters in Star Trek. Like, for fun, they read. like Shakespeare, or they listen to chamber music, and they have these academic pastimes. And like Jake and Nog just sit and people watch.
That's a really nice way of saying like ogling at women, but yeah.
Well, that too. All the Bajoran women. But you can almost see them in like flat caps, like throwing rocks at pigeons or something like that. And there's no one's got a cell phone. There's not like a TV that's always on in Quarks, except for your communicator, which they're only ever used for business. It's very easy to be completely alone in this world, unlike the constant updates and notifications and message received dings of our reality. I can't tell if that's a bug or a feature of the 24th century.
Yeah. So, I mean, like one read on that is, social media isn't actually designed to help you keep in touch with people. It's designed to hold your attention so that it can be sold to advertisers, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. And so, like, and if you think about it that way, then yeah, of course, a socialist utopia wouldn't have that, right? Because there's no point.
Yeah.
There's no reason for that to exist.
There's that one moment in DS9 where Quark has put advertisements on all the replicators.
Yeah. Right.
So when you like order, a plate of spaghetti or something, it says "Come to Quarks," and of course everybody immediately. That's just like a teaser because they just down,
absolutely
like, right
flip
away.
out. They're like, "That's disgusting. Why would you do that?"
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, man, yeah, you're right. That is disgusting. Come to Vermont. There's no billboards. Yeah, but yeah. So that's one way to look at it. Is just like social media isn't to keep you in touch with people. It's to sell you things, and so of course it doesn't exist in the Star Trek universe. The other way to look at it, I suppose, is that it you're looking at the military, or at least Starfleet as a exploring organization that might have a lot of restrictions on those things, right?
Sure.
It's just the people that you're looking at have restrictions. So, like, if, for example, in the United States military, it was only in 2010, which I guess is pretty fairly recent, that like you're allowed that all branches of the military like had to open all social media and then close off certain things for operational reasons, for operational security reasons, right, or something like that, and then like and they're not allowed to like look at pornography or like and politics. Basically, it's like like hate speech sort of stuff, right? And they have separate networks for like non-classified stuff versus classified stuff. So there's that, So it might also be that, but that's like sort of a less interesting way to look at things, right? Because I don't know, that just doesn't seem very creative or interesting or fun conversation to have. It's just like, oh, well, everyone else has it, but you just don't get to see it, right? But there is like I forgot the name of the episode, but it's like an early TNG episode where it's basically the Dare episode where it's drugs, but it's a video game. Yeah. Which I do believe is like a Reagan, like, say no to drugs funded episide. Like that's how they did that, is like, they're like, well, it won't be, he's like, is Roddenberry still alive? And he's like, well, no one in Starfleet does drugs, right?
Yeah, right.
So what else can there be? Oh, there can be like a game, and like games are fun. And then like, oh man, oh no, the game that actually plays with your serotonin. Oh no, which is what social media does a lot, right? It's supposed to give you a hit of that, which is ultimately, right, just like the thing that your brain produces when it sees something that it likes, right? Yeah. But then there is like there's the argument of like, well, if you design something to constantly give it to you to keep you active on the site, is that designing something with addictive qualities, right?
Yeah, and it seems like they'd be very against that. Even, I mean, but on that topic of serotonin and just doing things for a pleasurable response, whether it's conscious or unconscious, we just don't see people having fun, or I guess we don't see people like killing time. I mean, there's a lot of episodes where, like, specifically a child who doesn't have the military or scientific occupation that you'll see in Starfleet, they're just sitting by themselves in a dark room, or they're wandering the halls. I mean, like, Naomi Wildman's fine and all, but isn't there like some Fortnite she should be playing, or she's ghost riding the Delta Flyer or something like that? Like, we just don't see people screwing around a lot.
Right. Yeah. And part of that I think is, and by the way, I think it actually might be dopamine, not serotonin. I don't know. I'm not a
Oh yeah,
neuroscientist.
dopamine. Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, it was, yeah, I mean, so part of that I think is maybe like a liberal affectation of like the best humanity can be is, really excited about,
Shakespeare.
about Shakespeare and classical music, right? It
Yeah.
can't be about Logan Paul and Fortnite because that's like categorically not the best humanity can be, or what I don't really agree with that, but fine. Right.
Right.
I think that's probably what it's sort of trying to relay. Like that's why
It
you know,
makes it kind of sound like Star Trek then is just a salve or a masturbation for baby boomers with liberal leanings.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Not
I
to
mean,
hot take this, but
right, yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it is kind of like it feels very much like the Brooklyn toy store that's all wooden blocks.
yeah, and they're all black and white, right? Because
Yeah,
kids don't need color. Yeah,
right. Yeah, too stimulating. Can't overstimulate. Right, and it's like, but then on the other hand, I'm thinking like, well, if you absent all of the capitalist desires to like both accumulate things. And I should say manufactured desires, right? To accumulate things and to like do stuff for the sake of either monetizing attention or garnering some sort of following because you yourself you have to be a brand of one or
Right.
whatever. Like absent all of those things, I think it's actually it's part of our present society that we have a hard time imagining what something outside of that would be like. I think
Sure.
that's part of being trapped in that is having a hard time building an imagination of what it would be like with in something completely different. And so when we make Star Trek, it's like, oh, what is like the stereotypically like highest ideal separated from the hoi polloi that you can get, right? And it's like this bourgeois, idea of like sipping Earl Grey and reciting Shakespeare, and that's super fun to you, right?
right. Yeah,
And I think there was also, and I think this is the right idea of like Star Trek never wanting to be too newsy or like up to date, right? So there's no reference to like I don't know Devo, right? in TNG, right? They're not talking about like there was an ancient music called Madonna, right?
right.
They don't do anything like that.
I mean, they've got the Beastie Boys,
Right,
But that's
yeah.
like it took them 50 years to get there.
and I don't like it.
Well, there you go.
But I think it's only because it's only the Beastie Boys. Like stop. Like okay. Kirk loves the Beastie Boys. That's fine. Like that can be canon. That's fine.
Right.
But like at least play one more song from their canon,
Right.
or
Yeah.
right, or just like something in the genre. I don't just God anything.
You mentioned news before, and something that really gets me about Trek is that we never get a sense of how news is distributed. There's a scene at the end of DS9's, I think it's the fourth season, where everybody's watching a screen outside of Quark's, which I don't remember ever being there before. And Gowron is like declaring war on the Federation,
Right.
and everybody's watching it. It looks like a scene from like a disaster movie, a scene that you
Yeah.
don't see anymore because we have phones, where everybody's on the street and they're looking in at the RCA shop, and they're all watching the coverage of Godzilla, destroying the city or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it struck me that I've never seen a shot like that in Trek before, and I don't know if they were consciously avoiding doing stuff like that, or if writing this story, the DS9 story about this war, meant that they had to go, well, we have to do that type of shot because that's just how we know that people are picking up, and apprehending news.
Yeah. And then there's like there's like it's a little half-assed, or at least it's not fully developed. Is when Jake wants to be a reporter, right? And then you just sort of get like these like. And it is sort of like Victorian again, right? Like he should have like a little card in his hat or something, and right? And he's like, well, what? He's like trying to get like a story and like
Right.
running after people and like like talking about journalistic integrity, which is super weird.
Yeah. I would have
And
loved to have gotten David Simon to write on the seventh season of DS9 and have a whole like Generation Kill kind of war diaries sort of view of the Dominion War.
yeah, but but like looking at the production side of news as far as we can with Jake Sisko, and then there is that one moment in Star Trek Generations at the very beginning,
Yeah.
right, where there's just like people with like headgear, like staring, like getting really close in, and that's really the only two depictions of quote unquote the press that you see in Star Trek. And
why do you well, my question is, why do you need like multiple press outlets if nobody owns them and they don't have like, I mean, do they have competing views or ideologies, and are they don't have any advertisers like you mentioned before, so like why are there like 14 different like outlets?
Yeah, I mean like ideology would be one. In fact, there is it should be said that we live, or maybe we used to live, in a particularly unique moment in media history where everyone watched or read the same thing, right? So like the idea of everyone sitting down to listen to the nightly news, and everyone hears and sees the same nightly news. It's actually it's a blip in like the long time of everyone getting the news or just like hearing about what happened. It was either gossip, very early on, it's oral history, right? Or it's being told to you in lots of different ways by someone in regional authority, and then once literacy picks up, newspapers and pamphlets and whatever are very ideological and very partisan. And so I think we're kind of getting back to that now in a lot of ways. So maybe in Star Trek, there's more than one reporter. One for accuracy, for ideological reasons. The other one could be accuracy, right? So this feminist sociologist of science, or you might actually, it's probably more accurate to call her a philosopher, Sandra Harding, describes objectivity, or actually strong objectivity, she calls it, as getting multiple perspectives on the same thing, and from different what she calls subject positions, right? So like different kinds of people, or people from different walks of life, all observing the same thing together. The synthesis of all of those observations is much more closer to what we might call objective than one person saying something is true because they observed it, right?
Interesting, yeah.
And so maybe multiple people, so you'd imagine, like, especially in such a heterogeneous, diverse world like the Federation, or, Federation of Worlds, right? As a federation,
Sure.
You would need multiple people telling lots of different perspectives, because maybe the same event is interpretable in multiple ways from lots of different cultures that aren't completely, turned into one under the Federation, right?
Sure.
So maybe it's just like, there's maybe Beta Zeds just care about what people felt in the event, not the actual, right? Not the actual events, something like that.
If they had made any of the journalists non-human, I think that would have really worked.
That would. Yeah.
And even in a socialist paradise, there's still going to be some socialists who say it's not socialist enough.
Oh, of course, yeah. That's probably one of the defining qualities of socialism, is saying it's not enough.
I think it was in that same IO9 article that the author made the point that our advancements in this century have led to some of the like a realization of some of the dystopic elements from some sci-fi worlds, like media disinformation, economic upheaval and inequality, climate change, information security concerns. So like maybe Trek can't fully encompass modern technological trends because it's got to keep the utopian band together. Like those are the stories it wants to tell.
Or I guess the other way to put that, maybe this is saying the same thing, is that like on the track that we're on, this is just basically all the misinformation, all terrible things has to go away before you get to like, Star Trek Utopia, right? So like, this is a great way to get to World War III and the eugenics wars.
Yeah, sure,
right. And then that has to go away. Right. And then someone has to use a ICBM in Montana to go to warp. And
yeah. But usually this is when we would fly to another planet and say, oh, they're all wearing Google Glass, and it's a nightmare or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, that's why the ship goes to other civilizations, so we can tell those stories like as allegory.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's also, there's also just sort of like the role of like where we think technology, and specifically information technology or digital stuff, like what role and how much of a role it should play in our society, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to follow that just because we can completely recreate worlds in a holodeck or fly between worlds faster than light. It doesn't necessarily follow that then also we are constantly inundated with social media or like the things that we presently consider to be the like the furthest along in technological development, right? So like because like technology can go in all sorts of different directions, and it's not always linear, and it's not always like things building on top of each other. Like societies forget certain knowledges, or they find them not important anymore, right? And then you go do other ones,
right?
So it is also possible that we just stopped caring about the things that make iPhones work, and instead went and tried and did something.
That's great headcanon, but like Trek has never, I think if the writers had actually thought about it that way or thought of that, Trek has never stopped like spiking the football in terms of the things that it feels like it's proud that we've outgrown.
Sure.
Like nobody ever misses a chance to say that they don't like have money anymore.
Absolutely.
Or that television was this fad of an entertainment thing
Yeah,
the back in the 20th century.
Tom
You guys are on TV. Like, why are you negging TV?
yeah. Basically, it's like telling you all are Tom Paris. Like you're like
Right.
Every single Star Trek fan is no better than Tom Paris, pretty
Right.
much. Yeah, right. It's yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Information security specifically. It's something that makes almost no sense in Trek. I was watching a DS9 episode the other day. It was the one where Keiko gets possessed by a Pa wraith, and Chief O'Brien's trying to think of a way to incapacitate her without hurting her. At first, he asks the computer to locate her. Then he has the computer perform an invasive scan on her medical condition. Then he starts spitballing incapacitation scenarios with the computer, like, what if I shot her with a phaser? Or what would happen if I hit her with knockout gas? And none of this requires her consent. And as for like military security, the chief doesn't even have a commission. He's just a petty officer. Like, how can he do all this stuff?
Yeah. Why does he has access to all? Yeah, there's like, shouldn't there be like FERPA it was like HEPA violations or something.
Yeah, right.
In Discovery, I think it might even get worse, right? Because like then I think they're just like, I don't know, what's a cool way to identify someone that we haven't tried yet? I know, breath prints.
Yeah.
And then they're like, and then she just like collects some saliva off of Tilly's pillow and like blows it into and uses like a hypo spray to like blow it into the thing, and it's like accepted, and then she's in. It's like that was way too easy.
Yeah, they don't even have like retinal scans, and even retinal scans from a sci-fi perspective is like that's some old biometric security there. Are biometrics something that's taken seriously in Trek with these examples running around?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I was just watching Defiant, the Thomas Riker episode of Deep Space Nine, right? And Kira, right? Like he woos Kira onto the Defiant, and like everything's locked down, and she just like says like her password 1 2. First of all, everyone has like password 1 2 3 set as their password. Right, or it's like when Kirk blows up the Enterprise, it's like 1 2 3 Alpha Mark or something. Or like something
admin. Yeah,
it's like that's the password. Like, no, come on, man. It's like the Spaceballs thing is like password is 1 2 3 4. It's like some asshole's luggage. So like there's just like voice recognition is pretty much it, which doesn't cover half the transporter accident problems like Thomas Riker, right? Like, so now all of a sudden you would imagine Will Riker and Thomas Riker have the same access to everything.
Yeah.
They're physically the same person.
And like a transporter can identify, or like even the sensors can identify you by your individual life signs. But if you beam Thomas Riker aboard, a guy who, sure, at one point was genetically similar to Will Riker, but has he had the same shots, the same diseases? Like,
right.
Isn't there like a database somewhere that his biosigns can be checked against when he comes aboard? Like, how do those informatics even work in Starfleet?
Right. I mean, presumably there are, right? Because they're constantly like saying, where is this person? And is this person the person that we think it is? And they check, like his,
Yeah.
and they make vague reference to records. And the way that they tell that Thomas Riker and Will Riker are like genetically the same person but somehow different is they describe brainwave patterns.
Okay, well there you go.
Crusher identifies him based on brainwave patterns, specifically the ones, and most of them are formed in early childhood. Is what she is how she describes
Sure.
it, right? Whatever the hell that means, right?
Yeah.
But the super nerdy, like social science nerdy thing that you could go with that is that if you live in a society that is supposed to afford a lot of individual freedom while still having a lot of socialized services, right? Those two things often work in counter to one another quite often.
No voter ID in the 24th century.
Yeah. Well, so like in order to like provide services, you usually have to track things, and sometimes and it's this real catch-22, right? So like if you want to provide some sort of relief based on class or race or gender, you have to keep track of race, class, and gender, right? And so then that creates databases of those things, and that can be used for good and bad, right?
Right.
Or like if you want to, like when Democrats wanted to create a database of like mentally ill people to keep weapons away from them, it's like, okay, do I want the federal government keeping like a centralized database of everyone that has been, diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or something like that? Not really. It's like that seems kind of bad.
It is. And the way that data
Yeah.
concerns aren't really taken into account, and we don't expect like the writers of a sci-fi show to be able to project all this stuff into the future, but the way they don't take that into account, you think that would absolutely exist. I mean, just off the top of my head, I can't think of any examples, but a database like that has to exist in the 24th century of Star Trek. And so I wonder, like, what's the status of data privacy? Like you mentioned, providing services, scamming the Federation for your Andorian grandmother's like welfare becomes less of a problem when you've solved like scarcity.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it definitely could still be a factor.
Yeah. So definitely part of it is like, if you solve most social problems, then most of those concerns go away, right? Yeah, because like there's no one desperate enough to like steal your identity, right? Or like
unless they want to steal your ship, yeah.
Yeah, right. Unless they're Thomas Riker and they want to steal your ship because they're a Maquis terrorist, right? Which then like does so like this. It requires that the state solve social problems very quickly if they don't have those security measures in place, right? Like they want to placate people immediately because like if people get too angry, then like they form terrorist cells, and then like all the stuff that you haven't done for security purposes really bites you. Right. And in a world of, lack that doesn't lack, or that, that has no scarcity, right, that just has replicators all the time, is like, it seems like you could always sort of, just give people things until they shut up. Right?
That's really interesting. There's a series of sci-fi books that I'm a big fan of by the late author Ian M. Banks. And it's about a spacefaring race or civilization called the Culture, and they're very similar to, they're sort of an anarchic socialist utopia similar to the Federation, and they maintain no military really at all. And if they're ever threatened or they discover or contact a threatening race, they immediately switch like all of their production and industry to creating they don't call them warships, but they are essentially technologically superior warships. And then they just bear down on whatever it is, try to solve the confrontation, or the problem with technological superiority and also like ideological, negotiation. And then as soon as that's over, they just turn all the swords into plowshares and go back to being like this, hedonistic sort of civilization. And it's like, I could kind of see the Federation doing that, except it's just so still the idea of them, and they're not a military, but they're totally a military Starfleet. Those ideas are still so based in like 20th century society, like the way that we sort of view how we deal with the other. Absolutely.
Yeah. And no relation to Ian, but I haven't read that book, but I am familiar with like the idea of like the ideas in that book, and I really do like the idea, and I like how to play with those. What I would call those as like cultural fixes, right? So instead of, and that's not my word, that's another scholar named Linda Lane, who's very good, and you should read her work. But the idea is that instead you can fix a problem with a technology,
right?
You could fix it with like a social institution, right? Sure. Or you can fix it with culture. You can like make people care or not care about something. You can create a ritual that deals with a problem, right? You can do all these other things that that take the place actually of technology as a means of dealing with some sort of problem. And so
so like export culture.
Right. Yeah. Or China has a very long history of establishing trade relationships with countries or with nations that it might find as a threat, right? And if you're trading with them, you suddenly don't want to go to war with them because you need their stuff, right? So like that, that happens. Yeah. There's one vocabulary word that's useful to think about with all this stuff that the French theorist Michel Foucault came up with, called biopolitics, right? Where it's the politics of maintaining life, right? So the ability to say who can, the original sort of like kings and queens sovereignty is just saying like who lives or dies, right? Like off with his head, right? Sure. That's a really simple version. But then as you get into more modern nation states, you get to say how you might live, or who gets to reproduce, right? And so you get, which is like why, and the Star Trek universe has a very firm idea of that, and it's like no eugenics, right? So like they reject that sort of like who should reproduce, that's not okay, and that's I think Nazis had that idea, and that was bad, right?
Yeah, so, right. I think they made a mistake there.
Yeah, keep that idea, right? But then there's also like it being against the law to commit suicide, right? Like why you thinking like, well, why does that rule exist, right? Or like why did rules against gay sex exist, or sodomy laws, right? Like all of those laws have to be for something, perhaps more than just like hating gay people or something like that, right? It's about who gets to reproduce the society, right?
You brought up suicide, and that's something that has always sort of fascinated me about the Star Trek universe, because there are more than a few stories on the various shows about characters who are contemplating suicide or have made a decision to take their own lives. And it's almost never like, I just thought like the utopian federation that's all about like personal sovereignty would be like, okay, I mean, we'll give you all the help and the services and the counseling and support that you want, but if you make that decision, then it's kind of your decision. And I've been talking about DS9 a lot today, but there's a DS9 episode where Worf's brother, who is part of the Klingon culture, a different culture, wants Worf to kill him, and the Federation basically stops him, and they go to the limit where they erase his memory in order to keep him alive, which seems opposite to the values of the Federation.
Right, and that's also opposite of what Janeway decides when a Q shows up and wants to die.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's because, Q's break all storylines. So you just have to say, well, this is just the way it is because Q wants it that way.
Yeah.
Right. She, like, Janeway gets to be judge, and there also Riker makes a guest appearance. Riker keeps showing up in these,
Yeah.
but in that one, I think she makes a comment about how, like, suicide is just not allowed in the Federation, and she personally doesn't like it, and all these other, but then she also says, like, however, like, this, I can't find a basis for something like a Q to say that they can't end their life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course that Q is supposed to be like sort of like a Socrates sort of figure, right? He calls himself a philosopher, and he brings them to the Q continuum, and they're all bored.
Yeah, right.
And he's like, what sort of life is this? What's what is life good for if it looks like this? And and of course the puny humans, for them it's like, well, the universe is expansive, and so, like, we can't be bored. And perhaps maybe that's where it comes from, is that, like, some sort of I don't know if you want to call it paternalism or whatever, right? It's just like the Federation is like, there's so many cool stuff though, like, don't die, there's so many cool things. They've never met an ennui that they couldn't lick. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, or it could just be, it's something that is sort of like the avarice of, like, every exterior culture to the Federation constantly talks about how smug and arrogant Starfleet is, right? So part of that could be like, could influence that as well, right? This, like, civilizational culture of you don't know what's best for you. If you make certain decisions for yourself, then that's obviously the wrong decisions to make. I mean, obviously, it's the same culture that came up with Synthahol, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that seems sort of on brand.
That's about as close. Yeah, and that's about as close as to self-awareness, I think, that Trek gets as an institution.
Yeah.
They don't often dig into their own thing, and I don't. Maybe they think it's because the bubble of their utopia can't take too many pricks, but I don't know. I think it can. This is out of left field, but I was thinking about this the other day. Everything, I love the fact that everything is aggressively networked on Starfleet ships. Every other week, something in the holodeck becomes self-aware and immediately has access to all ship functions. Like, so as far as, like, their security goes, shouldn't there be like an air gap between the holodeck computers and, like, critical ship systems?
Yeah.
And it would be good for privacy as well, because if you want, this is all about the holodeck, if you want to run your special, Risa Spring Break number 5 program, you load it onto isolinear rods, or a physical media, and then you can just bring it down to the holodeck and swap it in, and there is no problem of somebody you don't log out of the holodeck computer or something, and somebody gets to see all your programs. Yeah, and I mean, it also, like, doesn't make sense that, I don't know, every once in a while, like, I think it's usually Janeway where they're like, she's really busy, and really busy means, like, there's a pile of pads on her desk. Yeah, and it's like, well, what? Yeah, I thought they were like, you can just, like, get like, that doesn't make any sense, so it's like there's no real consistency, it seems, between those sorts of like how information passes between hardware, and, like, man, you should have really, like, fixed this problem by now by air gapping the holodeck. And then there's also, like, the inconsistency of, like, how different things are considered real or fake, right? Based on those technologies, right? So that's a whole other show, yeah.
Right, yeah. There's where, like, Data should become human, but the Doctor, even in the 7th season, is, like, constantly being, like, belittled as not quite real, right? Whereas in the first seasons, they just, like, shut him off mid-sentence, right? But then they get a little bit nicer to him, and I do like that, sort of as television, that, like, you could that they have these different interactions with artificial life, but it's but it does seem really strange. And then, like, I think I've talked about this before, with you, but the fact that, like the doctor writes photons be free, and it like gets to all of these other holograms that are basically enslaved, right?
Yeah.
They're in like a mining, right? And then they start like passing along this like manifesto, and then it just drops. And it's like,
Yep.
and it's like, did they either like genocide an entire race of holographic beings, or did they erase all their memories? Right? Like, there's as we're talking about all of these things, it does definitely seem like there's some sort of really sinister, dark control over individuals that seems to pop up every once in a while implicitly in the show.
Those stories sneak through every once in a while. It's like what was it, like the second to last episode of TNG, the Enterprise computer essentially becomes self-aware and creates an entirely new uniform that just flies off, and they're like, "Huh, that was strange," and then just go back to what they were doing.
Yeah.
Scary implications.
Yeah, they don't really keep track of those things. Yeah.
I was you said you spoke about data before, and a different kind of data is what I want to talk about. I kept running into the term big data when I was reading up for this show, and I'm pretty sure that it's not a larger version of commander data that they're talking about. Can you give us a sense of what big data is as an idea?
Yeah, no, it's just a 14-foot tall Brent Spiner.
Yeah,
no,
right.
It's a right. So there's, I mean, like the term is not very well defined or used. Like you can, it's a buzzword that can get you grant funding. So quite often it's overused, which means it's very hard to give a concise definition. But it's essentially as we live in a world that constantly collects data about you and about like just ambient scenarios and situations, whether we mean to or not, we're creating all of this data that can be used for everything from selling you mattresses to figuring out geopolitics or whatever. It's they create massive amounts of data that is, and I think the thing about big data is that it's so big that humans can't work with it alone, right?
Okay.
You need some sort of algorithmic help to get through it all, because otherwise it would just be like exponentially too big to handle, to do anything useful with.
Okay.
And so you need some sort of powerful mathematics and computer hardware and software to sort through it all and make it useful.
Sure.
And what is I would say another hallmark is that it can bring about information from massive amounts of data that you couldn't get otherwise, right? So it makes inferences, it finds correlations that wouldn't be able to be discovered without all of this extra, without first collecting a whole bunch of information. And then the problem becomes, do you I said correlation, but it's not necessarily causation, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
So a lot of big data, and this is sort of a problem with social media, is like they'll find these correlations and assume that they're causations, or just assume something else underneath, right? So assuming that interacting with something on Facebook for longer means that you like it more, right?
Yeah.
That's not always true at all. If you're telling off your racist uncle, right? That's not you being happy, right?
Yeah.
And it's you being frustrated and like engaging with something because you think it's either important, or maybe you're just trolling him or whatever, right?
Right.
But the Facebook algorithm is like, ooh, you stayed on the site for 5 more minutes when that thing showed up, so we'll show you more of those things,
Right.
And that is at least in part, and they discovered this too late for them. Because user accounts sort of like fell off a cliff at some, I forgot exactly what time it was, but they they sort of found out that people were sad on their platform a lot, even though they thought they were optimizing for happiness.
Okay.
Right, and that's when you started getting a lot of words from Mark Zuckerberg about like quality and time well spent and mindfulness and all of these things that keep coming out. It's not because they actually care about like how you feel, right? They just they care about like how you map your emotions onto their platform. And if you're constantly being angry or sad on their platform, that's bad for business because and that's also why they only monitor for happiness, right? Because if they're selling ads, then you don't want to like they're looking for advertisers want happy customers, right? They want people to associate their brand with happy things.
Yeah.
So in Star Trek, though, right, like big data, would have to be something that's probably like less about advertising, right, and more about, I don't know, like how many pulsars there are in the universe. I don't know, but but there are like Discovery has started to like weave this sort of computer thinking.
Oh, there's no way that Tilly doesn't have a Facebook account.
Right. Yeah. So you do at one point do get characters that you could imagine having like putting like bunny ear Snapchat filters on there.
Yeah, right.
So one, you do get a different kind of character that seems uniquely suited to a digital life, but you also get the characters asking the computer and talking to the computer in very different ways.
Yeah.
Right. So there's the point. Well, there's a very strange moment where Saru starts asking the computer how good of a captain he is. Right. Yeah. And that's sort of like a big data moment, right? Where he's like asking it to cross-reference all these different personality traits. And that's something I guess you could really only get through, like sifting for one variable, filtering one variable over, massive amounts of data, right? Yeah. Then you can get some sort of correlative information there.
And he, as a guy when he's in the 23rd century, not even the 24th, but he trusts the AI or whatever elevated level of processing the ship's computer has to give context on the correlation of all that data, which is like, okay, well, he thinks the ship can tell him whether or not he's a good captain.
Yeah, like that's a very that doesn't seem to map well for me for all the other ways that they seem to have compartmentalized the computer in their lives as like something that you ask for things for, right? That seemed very un-Star Trek to just like out of the blue, like ask a very personal question of the computer. Yeah. The other moment was like, I think this was in maybe the pilot or it was very early on where Burnham is the ship is falling apart and she's basically like playing logic games with the computer.
Right.
To, like let her out. I thought those moments were strange. Basically, she gets to override security because she debate teamed her way out.
Right, and it's not even. I mean, it's a different type of security than we're used to because you can actually convince the computer it's not. You don't have the authority, and so therefore, no, it's not an if-then. Like the computer's actually like, that's a good point. Okay, out you go.
Yeah, which means that like at some point, a Federation, a Daystrom Institute scientist or whatever, had to, one, program ethics, right? Or like some sort of like trolley track like situation, right? So you think of all the prerequisites for the computer to have to make that decision, right? You have to put that in there. You have to put in all the parameters of like every single Federation species and like what it takes for them to survive, right? You have to put in all of these all these other factors that have to be, hoovered up from lots of other pretty invasive monitoring.
Right.
Right. And so that's like another moment where you realize that like, oh, they might actually be living in like a surveillance state.
Yeah.
But it's a benevolent surveillance state. And there's not a whole lot of things that it can take away from you.
Yeah.
You just sort of give up that sort of privacy. And, of course, like, privacy is sort of a socially constructed, like, cultural phenomenon that changes all the time.
That's true.
Right. So you could just, like, Federation individuals could just be totally fine with that level of surveillance because they trust institutions so deeply.
Yeah. I guess they've got nothing to hide.
Yeah. Well, they either have nothing to hide or they trust the institution so much that if they were hiding something, they're like, oh, you know what? I shouldn't have been hiding that. You're right.
You sent me a link to a story when we were talking about doing this show, and I even watched a TED-Med talk about it. Yes, you made me watch a TED Talk.
Oh, no.
But the story was about something called the Human Project that, from a scientific point of view, is revolutionary, but from a privacy perspective, I find terrifying. And it's this idea that this human project that's it's like in connection with NYU. They're going to collect data on like 100 different it's like 10,000 different families in New York. And it's that same idea of they're just going to do everything. They're going to grab all the data they can about them, just petabytes of data, and allow that to let them discover kind of emergent sort of properties. The byline or the tagline of it is that they're trying to quantify the human condition, which is like, like you said before, that's the kind of thing that gets you grant money. But the kind of, I don't even want to call it a surveillance state because I love this show, but it's sort of like what they live in. Like we used the Keiko example before, like Starfleet has this information on you. And so they live in like this, fictional sort of benevolent society. But I just kind of wonder, it just seems like that kind of data is gonna get leaked at some point to me.
Yeah. And if listeners want to read along, it's Databodies in Codespace. You just Google that word salad.
Sure.
The author Shannon Mattern is a really good person to follow for like data and big data in urban environments and cities and modern life. Mm-hmm. She writes a lot of really interesting stuff and asks some important questions. But yeah, there's like in order to like make all of the Star Trek technology possible, yeah, you have to buy into these biopolitics, right? You have to let so much of the state or like these institutions know a lot about you, specifically so that it can provide a bunch of stuff to you.
Yeah.
Or like know what you need, right? Yeah. It's like if you're living in a society that gives you everything that it wants, it needs to know what you want. Right. Yeah. And even if they're in like a post-scarcity world where you have replicators and free energy, right, there's still probably something that's like keeping track of everything that you've ever replicated.
Right.
Maybe not.
There's a TNG scene where Troy tries to order a chocolate sundae, isn't there? And the computer's like, this exceeds your set daily caloric requirements.
Yeah, maybe
intake.
Something like that, or even like in Discovery that I don't know who decided to do this, but all of a sudden like the replicator has like an attitude or something.
Oh yeah, they're ordering burritos or whatever.
Yeah, or it, like I don't know, it has like some sort of Michelle Obama nutrition thing going on where it's like a fruit smoothie, an excellent source of fiber. Right. I'm like, why would in a democratic society would you ever want that to do that?
Yeah,
like,
right.
I don't know why I would ever want a computer to tell me like judge my food decisions, right? I guess, or maybe it just says positive things about what I've ordered. In which case, like I wonder what like a burrito, tasty, right? It's like it can't say anything good about it. Although
right.
Also if it's being synthesized, like it could probably put in whatever nutritional value you need,
sure.
Right?
Just
like
fill it out with sawdust, but have like enough vitamins in it or something like that. And NutraSweet. Yeah.
No, I would imagine like they keep track. Like something has to keep track of all of that, if not just to like keep energy going in the right places, right? To like power all those replicators. But I imagine there's also like, well, if there's an old business school motto, right? Like you count what you care about, right?
Yeah.
And so like, if the Federation, in the best intentions, cares about people, right, and their health and well-being, they have to monitor that, right? That's
Sure.
the only way you, as a state, you can do something about. The only way to do something, right? The prerequisite is to track it and so yeah, there has to be like all of these like central databases of, how many chocolate sundaes Troy has eaten. Because if anything, it could be anonymized data, right? But you do need at some level, like some health scientist somewhere has to be like, I don't know, on the Australian continent, everyone's replicating a bunch of extra blankets. Maybe there's something going on there that everyone's like feeling a chill, and he's like Google tried to do that and it actually didn't work very well with like trying to find outbreaks of like the flu by monitoring like the searches for symptoms.
Okay.
And it works to some degree, but of course, like this is like sort of the social life of data, right? Where data, not the character, right? But like that the idea that that only works at certain levels of literacy and at certain levels of internet adoption and stuff like that, and even thinking about Google as a place to get relevant and important information about your body, right? Instead of like, say, going to a doctor or like, someone that's like senior in your community or something like that. Maybe you don't even think about Google as a place to go for health related things. You have to kind of be taught that. And so like it might work in the United States, but in several African nations, like it couldn't track the Ebola outbreak. One, because people weren't Googling like what to do about Ebola, and quite often like those state governments could figure it out much faster than Google could, and it's because like the data didn't matter when it came up against just like an established, trusted institution.
Interesting. From an informational or even a scientific perspective, I think something like the Human Project is fascinating and probably very effective. I mean, the head scientist in her TED Talk was comparing it to the difference between early astronomy and modern astronomy. Like when Galileo looks in a telescope, he's like, oh, interesting, Saturn has rings. Okay, we'll write that down. It's an individual endeavor, but now that we have thousands of radio telescopes and satellites, you leave them on all the time and you collect all the information you can, and then discovery becomes a process of data science and interpretation as much as anything else. And that's how scientific studies have worked since the Kinsey reports and the Nurses' Health Study and whatnot. And like you said before, like more and more artificial intelligence starts playing a huge role in finding those patterns and correlations in the data. But again, we kind of run into a wall because Trek's exploration of AI is rudimentary, or it's just maybe just taken for granted. Like when Saru says, just talks to the computer, I think, somebody like you, as somebody who looks at this stuff all the time, goes, wait a minute. But I think the audience just goes, oh yeah, you talk to the computer, sure.
Yeah. I mean, it could be just like so in the computation could be just like so in the background that there's lots of things that just like don't show up in the script because it's just we're taking it as real and not a TV show, right? You just like imagine a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
That just like are relying on the computer and no one even talks about because I can't imagine a world where a computer wasn't taking care of something important, right? There is like this like big shift in scientific research going from like individual observation to just constantly monitoring and then figure out later what your hypothesis or your question or your research statement is, right? For now you're just collecting a bunch of information, right? And there are now like competitive research grants where you get money and the data at the same time.
Yeah, right.
And you're like here's a data set. We don't know what the hell's in it, but here's like the rows and columns of this Excel spreadsheet. So here's what you might find, right? And here are the times that we took the information, and you can apply for up to $10,000, and tell us what you would do with that. Right. It's sort of like an essay contest to say, like with this information, I think I'd be able to figure out these things. And I would need this much money to run it on my campus, like really big, expensive computer.
In the literature for the Human Project that I was reading, it definitely felt like it was all packaged to sell. I mean, the people they're studying will be anonymized, and hopefully their information won't get out. But yeah, the data and the techniques used to process the data were like, that's what's on offer here. Like, that's the product. As far as people sort of submitting to this, like you said, in the 24th century, you know, maybe people will just believe in the benevolence of the institutions. But the Human Project, somebody posed them that idea, and they described it, or they posited that people would see it as an act of civic duty to sort of assist in this sort of research. And I thought it was like, do people, like normal everyday civilians, do they think in those terms? Like, are people just going to give this up, or do they really understand what they're giving up?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think, I mean, if you do look at polls of like what people still trust, you know, generally,
yeah,
it's like small businesses, the police and military are actually still, you know, the things that are the most in the United States. Mm-hmm. And data companies up until recently, really, like the 2016 election, pretty much, ranked up there as like they could do no harm, right? Like they were very well respected, and everyone sort of trusted that they knew what they were doing with all the information that they were collecting. But obviously now that's not quite the case. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, don't really think about like where their data goes, and they believe oftentimes the best intentions, I think, of the people that are asking for it, largely because it's, you know, all of the, you know, our sort of all the Silicon Valley stuff is designed to be very difficult to understand, and is right and is secretive, so that you kind of fill it in yourself as like, oh, these are just like fun toys that you know, they run ads against in order to make a little bit of cash, you know. It's like, and they're all well-intentioned people, so like, what could go wrong? Yeah. It turns out everything. Another Shannon Mattern essay, actually, is the same person that wrote the Databodies in Codespace that we're talking about with the Human Project. She wrote another thing about Hudson Yards, which is a smart city project in New York City. So there's the yards, the eponymous yards are the all the tracks that I believe it's the Long Island Railroad are parked in, or maybe it's New Jersey Transit, like parked in I think it's like around Chelsea, mm-hmm. You know, and in the late 70s, they figured out, if you can just drive some pylons directly into the bedrock in between the tracks, you could build a platform on top of these yards, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of square footage in Manhattan.
Right.
Right. And they couldn't, developers couldn't quite get it done for decades until now, where they're building this like big smart city thing that is mostly Google sort of powering a lot of it. And it's like, you know, you live in the apartment that you live in, monitors your trash and like what you keep your thermostat set at, and you have like a dashboard where you can look at your inputs and outputs of everything, and like they say even like the dirt is smart because it's like made from all of this like matter, this organic matter that has like sensors embedded underneath it to like keep the thermal load of the subway underneath in check, so that it doesn't kill all the plants above it. Okay. And there's like a tons and tons of stuff in like in this building project, and what Mattern argues is that, you know, when you build this world of like constantly monitoring and checking things, you start to think about all of these problems that might be collective problems as individual issues, right? So instead of caring about the environment or sustainability writ large, you care about your own personal like trash and recycling habits, right? Yeah. Which may not be the best way to think about that problem, right? And the other problem is that you take things that might be political or social issues, and they get turned into these sort of data monitoring projects, right?
Yeah.
So and perhaps we see that in Star Trek implicitly, right? Is that instead of and maybe and in fact it does seem very implicit in Star Trek because we never hear about like who is. They make vague references, right, to like the Federation Council, but
Yeah.
who the hell is on it? You know, like
Yeah,
what does
right.
it do? Right, like none of the government doesn't really seems very absent, or at least very far away and vague. And what's very present is monitoring and checking things and making decisions based on these information patterns, right? And which kind of takes out what all the should questions and replaces them with can we or how or something like that, right? So like all of the ethical decisions seem to be already made,
Sure.
and now it's just like figuring out all the data so that you can make those already decided ethical decisions.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the last time that we talked, we were speculating on whether Mark Zuckerberg would go up against the wall when World War III hits in the Star Trek
Think about
universe.
that every day. So yeah,
and now we can speculate on whether Peter Thiel will join him against that wall.
Yeah, I mean, like, I something about PayPal, because we'll add Elon Musk to that too, right? Because
Sure.
yeah, it's like, man, he got that name drop in Discovery, and that was
They already voted on that side. So
yeah, that was pretty cringeworthy, honestly. But yeah, it's because like one, it's like, what did he really invent? Really,
Yeah.
like, right? You know, like he didn't invent batteries, he didn't invent PayPal, like he didn't invent like credit cards, which is all PayPal really was, right? He's just like very good at bringing things together in an interesting way, and then like garnering attention, and which today attention sort of equals money, right?
Right.
You can get attention, money follows it.
Yeah.
And that's really what he's particularly good at, which is, not to say that, Edison is probably the same. So, I'm actually talking myself out of this argument, right? Whereas like Edison also, like, we attribute a lot of inventions to him, but really he was good at taking existing inventions and making them, scaling them up to industrial levels, right? So people invented the light bulb, other people invented the light bulb, but he was the first one to figure out like how you can mass produce the light bulb, right? And like that's
right. Like in First Contact, maybe it was like what was her name, Lily or whatever. Maybe she designed the ship, but Cochrane was like piloted it, and he was the guy that sold it to everybody as a thing.
Right. Yeah, and I think that probably that still follows most of human history, where like the white guy takes credit for what a black man does. Right, like that.
You're not so advanced, Star Trek. Come on.
Yeah. Oops, I did that. Yeah. Oh, and actually, that does remind me that there's another classic rock, like not another moment where there's music that isn't classical music or like Klingon chamber music or whatever. Right? Is Cochrane is like, oh no, abort! I forgot something, and then he like pulls out like this green mini disc thing. He like plugs it in, and I forgot what song it is, but it's like
Magic Carpet Ride.
It's Magic Carpet Ride.
Yeah, but it's a cover though.
Yes, because you can't afford the rights to.
Yeah, well, who knows what they've lost in the war?
Yeah, right. Also that. Yeah. Oh my God, that would be like the worst. Like in the war, like all the Spotify servers are destroyed, and the only thing that's left is like bad covers on YouTube.
YouTube covers of 14-year-old girls with guitars singing into the camera. Yeah.
That's all that's left is, of our entire shared music.
That's a dystopia.
Yeah, that's bad.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me today to talk about this kind of stuff. Hopefully, the audience will find this interesting. If they do, where can people find you online?
Let's see. The best place is unfortunately Twitter. DA_Banks BANKS. My website's davidabanks.org, which will help you find that Twitter, unfortunately. Sure. And then there's and that's also where all my writing lives and stuff like that.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Dr. Banks for indulging my questions about this particular topic. I don't know if we'll see any Instagram snaps from Ensign Tilly anytime soon, but at the very least, maybe we can get these people some photo IDs. I've included links to the article we mentioned, Databodies in Codespace, and to the website for the Human Project. They're both fascinating reading, and you can learn more about David's work and his involvement with the Theorizing the Web conference at his website, davidabanks.org, and give him a follow on Twitter at @DA_Banks. He's always sharing some very engaging content on these subjects. And if you find yourself looking to do the reading on these subjects that we discussed today, I've left some links in the show notes to a few texts that explore these ideas, like Treknology, The Science of Star Trek from Tricorders to Warp Drive by Dr. Ethan Siegel, or Biopolitics, An Advanced Introduction by Dr. Thomas Lemke, or the New York Times bestseller Everybody Lies, Big Data, New Data, and What the Internet Can Tell Us About Who We Really Are by Dr. Seth Stevens-Davidovitz.
Doctor, and doctor. Well, we miss anyone?
All of these texts are available on Amazon, and when you click through the links in our show notes or through our Amazon banner on enterprisingindividuals.com and make a purchase, a small percentage of your transaction comes back to us here at the show at no extra cost to you and helps keep the Warp Core lit here. And this counts for anything. It's not just Star Trek stuff. You can actually bookmark the banner at Enterprising Individuals, and when you get to Amazon that way, whatever you buy, that same deal applies. It's a great way to support our show and get yourself some book learning at the same time. And maybe you're saying, hey man, I've got all the socio-political seminal text I can carry. I've got Michel Foucault on speed dial. I'm set. To which I would say, I think he's out of network. Who's your wireless carrier? But I would also say, if you like what you hear on Enterprising Individuals and you want to support the show, why not head to our Patreon page at patreon.com/EISTpod. It's there that you can sign up to be a crew member for the show for a small monthly donation, and you can get access to our exclusive subscriber content, like our live shows, including our live show recorded this year at Convergence 2018 with Melinda Snodgrass, and we discussed her classic TNG episode, The Measure of a Man. You can also get my DS9 rewatch recaps and our new episode commentaries, like our latest commentary for The Cage. There's show merchandise and more. Just head to patreon.com/EISTpod and become a member of the crew today. Anybody can join our crew. We're not picky. You bring the burritos, we've got the roasted tomato salsa. It's at patreon.com/EISTpod. And as always, anything you can contribute to the show will be appreciated and will help keep us flying. Thanks. And while we're on the topic of social media, I wanted to make an exciting and terrifying announcement. Enterprising Individuals is, of course, on Twitter at EISTpod and on Facebook at facebook.com/EISTpod. But now we also have a Facebook group. Yes, Zuck may be in trouble when the eugenics wars go wide, but for now, we're all still dancing to his tune. So if you're a Facebook user, please join our group entitled Enterprising Interlocutions. That should be pretty easy to find. There's not much there currently, but I'll be building it up over the next coming days. I have so much fun having in-depth, fascinating conversations with my knowledgeable guests, and I hope we've done our part to get you really thinking about the kind of issues and ethical questions that Star Trek runs on. And my goal for the group is to have it be a place where people can, as I say every show, continue the conversation. So check it out on Facebook by searching for Enterprising Interlocutions, and as always, we're waiting to receive your transmission. And that's it for this episode of Enterprising Individuals. If you're an Apple Podcast listener and you haven't yet, why not look us up on Apple Podcasts and make sure that you're subscribed to the show. Also, write us a little review if the spirit moves you and give us a rating at the very least. We'd appreciate it. If you're not an Apple Podcasts user, you can still subscribe to the show on Google Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you get our show from. And if you leave positive comments and ratings and reviews on those platforms as well, we would be eternally grateful. Next week on Enterprising Individuals. Anyone who tells you Star Trek shouldn't be funny is, well, wrong. Or at the very least, they've really got a grudge against tribbles. Trek is no stranger to exploring comedy, be it through the foibles of whimsical characters like Harry Mudd or Q, to the absurd everyday realities of a world with holodecks and fraught interspecies interactions. Gene Roddenberry himself was the first Trek comedy hater, convinced that humor would topple the clay-footed edifice of his great creation. But the talent and persistence of the skilled actors of the original series, along with Trek's writing staff and another Gene, Gene Kuhn, would all serve to ensure that humor, along with adventure and introspection, would remain one of the pillars of Trek for the life of the franchise. Dr. Steve Molman joins the show next week to talk about an episode that raises important concerns about the Prime Directive, but also has time for a few games of Fizbin. It's a piece of the action, next time on Enterprising Individuals. And until then, I'm your Captain Caliban signing off and saying live long and prosper.